Allow me to introduce you to the world of progressive metal. Into the unknown. So how do you take a Disney princess song and turn it into a progressive technical metal song? That's what I'm going to try to show you today. If you haven't seen it already, I did a cover recently for the song Into the Unknown from Frozen 2, so you can check that out. And this was the first project I have. What I've got right here is my draft for kind of writing. This is what I used to learn how to play the song and kind of figure out how to translate it into a progressive metal song. I thought it was a cool enough idea that was worth exploring, and I thought it might be kind of a good opportunity for me as a musician just to be able to showcase kind of my style with, you know, a song that's fairly well known. I mean, it's fairly well known. I think it's got like over 200 million views, so I think a few people know it. I don't know if any of them like metal, but they know the song. So let's have a look at the project here. So the first thing I did was I got the actual track, and I started this back in early 2020, so like shortly after the movie had come out. I know I was really late to releasing my version of it, but there were really only two versions of the song. There was the movie version, which I have right here, and there was the Panic at the Disco cover. And I listened to that a little bit, but I really wanted my main inspiration to come from the actual track. I only referred to the other version just for a few sections, just to kind of get an idea how they handled certain areas of the song. So I brought it in here, and I got the tempo set. It's at about 105 BPM. And pretty much the first thing I did, I just grabbed my guitar, and I was trying to find the melody and the chords. So like I would just listen to the song. So it's kind of hanging on that chord there. And it's going to switch. There's 1,000 reasons I should go about my day and ignore your whispers, which I wish would go away. Oh. So I just went through the song like that and just did simple power chords just to kind of learn the chord progression and to learn the arrangement of the song. And then at the same time I was using the software piano to dial in the notes here. So what I needed to do was then take this and translate it into a key that I could sing and that was appropriate for the tuning of my guitar. So I tend to play in drop C tuning. So I had to figure out kind of how that was going to work. I think I jumped ahead to the chorus. Let's go to that high note. Usually what I do if I'm trying to get a song into my key, I know my range. This A right here. It's not the highest note that I can hit, but if the melody's hanging out around there, it's probably going to be too high for me. It's going to be exhausting. But if I'm just coming up there or just to a few notes higher every now and then, that's usually a good range for me. So let's see what the highest note is. All right, so a little higher than an A. And I'm not Brendan Urie, so I couldn't sing that. So I wanted to bring this down. So I think what I did was I took that high note, and I tried to move it down into my range. Here's that A. So if I went like right there. So that's the chord right there. And I think I saw that going from here to there. And I realized, oh, if I move this down two more, that kind of works for the drop C tuning. Because I can play the first chord here, then go down, here, and then back. So I was like, that might work. The other thing that helped me indicate it was the intro. I can't remember exactly when I started working on that, but I knew I wanted the intro to be kind of riffy. I didn't just want to write like power chords. I wanted some kind of notey stuff in there. I can't remember exactly how I came up with it and what stage I came up with it, but I wrote this little picky riff. When I wrote that and realized I could go from here down to that drop C, that just seemed like the appropriate key for my kind of tuning. Now, for a while I was actually concerned that it might be too low. So part of me knew that the song was sort of designed to really put a spotlight on that high note. That was like the big moment of the song. And so I was thinking maybe I need to put this in a key where I can hit my highest note. But ultimately I decided to stick with this key because I felt like if I practiced I would have more control over my voice for the whole song, and instead of just competing to see how high of a note I can hit. And I mean, I can't hit as high of a note. Again, I'm not up here, so whatever. Yeah, so all I did, find that high note, and then I just bring it down to something lower. In this case, I think it's a G. Yeah, right there. I was able to just drag down the whole melody, so now it's in my key. but I won't. Some look for trouble. So that's kind of a nice little trick there. So then it just came to writing. I didn't just start at the beginning. I started where the ideas were, you know, and the first idea came from that chorus. You know, the into the unknown. Wow, that was awful. Into the unknown. So the first time I heard that chorus, that kind of marching rhythm, I was hearing this drum beat, this bop, you know, that snare on the downbeat. That was kind of the main thing. And then I could hear it like building in intensity and adding some double bass there. So here are the guitars I recorded. I'm pretty sure I had super old strings on my guitar, and I've only got it going through a few plugins because this is just the writing stage. This isn't the final product. But I started with that, and then I wrote the drum beat. So this was my starting point. Ah, that's where it was going to get good. So that was like the main driver. And, you know, I recorded that and I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. That didn't exactly persuade me to do the whole song yet, but that definitely showed more potential. Like, yeah, there's something here. When I write, and especially when I was writing this, my main instruments are the guitar and the drums. And I would just kind of go back and forth, try to figure out how to interpret the orchestra into the guitar and how to write riffs out of that. And then whenever I kind of hit a blank, I would just go to the drums and find out the right groove. Usually in courses, I have kind of a tendency to write chords and then some kind of lead part over top. So I do have these lead parts right here. So I kind of had a few different variations of that, and it was funny, looking back at this, I was like, why didn't I use that? But again, I think it was just because it sounded kind of cool, but it felt like a lot of extra work for something that probably didn't really matter all that much, and so I decided, again, I wanted to make this as easy on myself as I could, so I kind of left that out. These current guitars are really muddy, but the final guitars were a lot brighter, a lot tighter, and you could really hear the high end of the chord, and so that was kind of enough to give it that air that would have come from the lead part. Still pretty cool. I might have to try to fit it in there somehow, but yeah, it wasn't something I wanted to stress about. So I had kind of an idea for the chorus, but now I wanted to look at the verses. Let's have a listen to the original verse, and then we'll sort of see how I translated that to guitar. Just kind of chords, and it's really just the strings doing like bum 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 bum. So the first thing I would have done is just translate that into my key, so that's going to start here. Bum, 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 bum. But I didn't want to do just power chords because that's boring, and my style is kind of progressive metal, so I was like, all right, how do I take this chord and build a riff out of that? Kind of in the intro, they kind of hint at these notes here. So I tried to write something that kind of featured those notes in there, so I came up with this. And then I tried to kind of stick with that theme, going to this open note. And that little descent there, I'm actually pretty sure this was inspired from the intro because I know they kind of have that like diminished chord descent. The first version that I wrote might not have been the same as the final version. I probably wrote it one way, and then as I got more familiar with the track, I was able to tweak it to kind of closer resemble what was in the original track. Now, I think once I wrote that riff, I was able to just play the other chords kind of like that. But then I kind of hit like a dead end, and I wasn't really sure what to do. So that's where I'll usually go to drums. And you can kind of hear, just from playing that, to me, the drum part already writes itself. I could imagine something with toms doing bum 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 papa pop bum 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 papa dum bum bum dum papa da bum dum dum papa dum. So that's exactly what I wrote. I just kind of bum bum dum papa da, you know, kind of did that. And I think I had that first, and then I felt like it was a bit redundant, so to change things up, I do a variation of that beat with the China in there. And so that was the first beat I wrote. But here's the thing about drum beats. Whenever you do a tom beat like that, usually it feels like you're building up to something, whereas playing more of like a groove beat or a straight beat feels like you are settled in the song. So that was one variation I came up with, but then I've got this other beat variation over here. So you've got that polyrhythm with the ride there. You know, I liked both. They were really cool. And so that's kind of what'll happen is sometimes I'll come up with multiple ideas, and it's not always that you have to say no to one. Sometimes you just gotta find the right place for them in the song. So I felt like the toms would work well at the beginning because the song is building up, and then once you're in the song, verse 2, you go to that groove rhythm with the ride. And then we get to the pre-chorus. One thing I try to do when writing songs is I try to use a different technique from section to section. Because if you're just using, you know, power chords, or whatever, you know, and then you write another riff, it feels like more of the same thing. Whereas when you use like a different technique, the song feels like it's progressing and it feels like it's actually going somewhere, and it makes it more interesting to listen to. I wanted to give it more metal, so I wanted a double bass section, and I did this kind of speed picking thing, so we can listen to that. Let's listen to the original track, see what they did. You can hear those notes rising. So I wanted to kind of simulate that with speed picking. I'm starting down here, but when I play this open note, it gives me the opportunity to hit some notes to ascend. And if that sounded kind of sloppy, it was, because remember, I was writing this, I hadn't learned how to play it yet, so it was definitely pretty rough. But yeah, one guitar is just playing, yeah, that's the higher octave, and then this other guitar is playing the same part, just an octave lower. So it can be cool to layer those together. And then of course you've got like this double bass drum beat. Alright, so now let's talk about the second verse. So in songwriting, usually you want the verses to sound similar enough where people know it's the verse, but you want something distinctive about each verse so that people can tell where they're at in the song. There should be something about the first verse that lets them know, okay, we're in the first verse, and something different that kind of tells them, alright, we're further along, this is the same part, it's the verse, but there's something about it that helps you distinguish it from the first part. Now here's one advantage I think I had, not necessarily with metal, but just with a full band. Drums can do a lot, and I think I had the ability to really make each part distinguishable, whereas in the original track where it's just orchestra, I mean, maybe there was a better way to do it, but it was hard to tell where you were at in the song, and then all of a sudden just the chorus would pop out of nowhere. Because the intro kind of feels like its own thing, and then it goes into this verse, and then it feels like it goes into a pre-chorus, but it's actually not really a pre-chorus. Then it does go into a pre-chorus, and then the chorus pops up. So you've got all that. So by the time you get to the second verse, as a first-time listener, it was hard to remember what the first verse sounded like, so you couldn't really tell like that you're back in the verse. And I think what they tried to do to differentiate the second verse from the first one is they slow it down. The tempo changes and the song drags, and it kind of gives her like a moment to reflect as a character and stuff, so I kind of get it cinematically, but again, the arrangement was already so complex that it was just kind of hard to follow. You had no clue where you were at and what was happening. Now, after I've listened to it a lot, I get it, like I get how it works, but I just remember the first time listening to it, it was a bit difficult. The Panic at the Disco version, they stay up to tempo, they don't drag it out. Their second verse is kind of similar to their first verse, if I remember correctly. So I keep it up to tempo. I did not drag it out, but I had to figure out how I was going to distinguish it. Now, one thing that might have been enough was just going into that groove beat. But then, again, we have that sort of false pre-chorus that happens. This section here, these chords right here, I think technically that's part of the verse, but there isn't a pattern there. It's constantly changing, and so that almost feels like a pre-chorus, but it's not. This is the pre-chorus. So again, that's where technique comes in handy, because the fact that I am using this sort of arpeggio technique for the verse and then the speed picking technique for the pre-chorus really helps you distinguish from part to part. So we kind of have the same thing going on here. I'm starting with that same technique, but I felt like it needed more distinction from the first part. I didn't want it to be too similar. And so something inspired this chuggy section here. So I'm still following the same chords there, but I'm playing them differently now. Instead of playing them with the arpeggio technique, I'm doing this kind of polyrhythm chug thing. Now last time we went to speed picking for the pre-chorus, but again, sometimes you get more than one idea. One idea I had was to do speed picking. Another idea I had was this really like steady beat, this like boom, ding, ding, pop, ding, boom, ding, ding, pop, ding, boom, ding, ding, pop, ding. And so that's kind of what I end up doing here. So what really makes that is the bass, which I haven't really talked about the bass because I did most of the writing with the guitar and drums. So it kind of gives it that like kind of bouncy, head bobby feel. And it kind of gives it a break from the intensity. Everything's like really intense, and you gotta have dynamics. Even in metal, you gotta have dynamics. It can't just be blast beats the whole time. So I was going with that, and they extend this pre-chorus. They've got this little extra chord here. And I found out that it was this chord for my key, and then I found out, oh, this is an opportunity to use a chord that I learned from the Faceless. It's a really tough chord to play, and I can't play it. There we go. That's a hard chord, but man, it's like pretty and sad and suspenseful all at the same time. Yeah, I heard that and I was like, yep, that's what we're doing. So that sounded cool. We go into the chorus. Now, I think at this point, I had my verses, I had the chorus. So I think I listened to that and I heard it back and I was like, crap, that sounds pretty good. I think I'm going to have to do this. Because again, I was on the fence for most of this project. That was enough to keep me going. Eventually we get to the guitar solo, or vocal solo. In the movie, it's just all vocals. She's singing, whoa, and there's that like voice in the distance, ah, and I think the point is they're supposed to be like out of sync, and then gradually they come together into a harmony. But I wasn't going to be singing, oh, I wasn't going to be singing that. So I felt like the best way to interpret that would be as a guitar solo. Now, one kind of pet peeve I have with this part, so if you listen to the chord progression, let's listen to the original real quick. So we've got that one chord, and we go to a 4 chord, and I was like, oh, if it goes to a 6, that'd be cool. But, what? It goes back to a 1 chord, So for those of you who don't know, this is the 1 chord, meaning it's like the most resolved note, it's the note in the key. Starting there, and it goes to a 4 chord, so 1, 2, 3, 4, that chord. And then I thought it would sound cool to go to a 6 chord. But that's not what they do. Instead, they go back to the 1, and that's one of those things that just kind of bugged me. Again, there's a lot of sections in the song where I'd hear something and be like, hey, that's actually cool. And then it just seemed to go in a direction that I didn't really care for. I know music's subjective, but that's why I did it my way. So, so for the solo, we're back in my key. So that's our 1 chord. And then we go to 4. And then I go to 6. And just to make it more interesting, I could have played them just as power chords. But I like to extend chords. I meant to do this, and I accidentally did this. And I was like, ooh, that's really cool. So I've got this really weird chord. It feels weird to play, but it sounds cool. And then I just made all these ninths by extending my pinky. And then for the solo, I pretty much just tried to follow the melody of the vocal and then just kind of add a few things to keep it interesting as a guitar solo. And since there were harmonies with the vocals, I had a harmony layer as well. So that's pretty rough. Again, I couldn't play it at the time. It's really funny. You can actually see I've cut up this guitar solo here. I had to cut that into like 3 sections because I couldn't play it yet, but I did practice it and I did play it for Rizzle. Yeah, so I did learn how to play it, but again, when you're just writing, that's one of the frustrating things. You'll have a cool idea, but you can't play it yet because you got to practice. So yeah, usually the rough draft, it's a really rough, like, drunk guitar solo, but the final version, you know, is a lot nicer, a lot more polished. And then the ending kind of wrote itself, to be honest. And then I had to go back to the beginning. That was the trickiest part. I wasn't sure how to handle that. I kind of knew I was going to do clean guitars, and then it was going to have to kick in to, like, the metal stuff. If you listen, there's this piano part in the intro. Bum, 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 bum. I can hear you. So you can hear the piano's doing this like bum 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 bum, and then it's got this kind of thing happening. So I figured out how to play that on piano, and then I transposed it down to the key that I was playing in. And I had to figure out how to kind of interpret that on guitar. So I ended up doing this. Now what's interesting is I could have done this. I could have gone... Could have do that, because that's what the piano does. And part of me was like, why didn't I do that? And I think at the time, this actually feels kind of weird. I think it was just a little tricky to play. And then later I had the idea to add harmonies. And I would have had to go like that. I think this was just one of those things where I felt like it was more trouble than it was worth, and I just wanted to keep things kind of simple for myself. So I didn't worry about it. I might have to revisit that, because that's actually kind of cool. A little sort of bluesy descent thing. That's one thing I'll give the songwriters credit for, is I've noticed they do use a lot of really cool techniques and weird chords. Like even the song, the original version is in G sharp Dorian. So it's in like a really weird scale. Now I don't know if it stays in that key for the whole song. I think it changes at a few places. But they do use some pretty weird chords, and that's something that I can appreciate. I don't think it necessarily works all the time, but I'm glad that they at least make the effort rather than just phoning it in. So then the tricky part was having to write like the rest of the clean guitar. Again, you can see here I've got it looped because I could only play it for like one measure and then I'd mess up. And then here I had to play each section individually, and I've got these fades to kind of smooth it out, but it's so funny looking back at this because it was challenging to play, and so I had to kind of like stitch it together and sort of create this Frankenstein version of it. So here's the guitar. And you can hear it sounds kind of loopy. And then here's the transitions. And I don't know if it's just because this project is using up a lot of CPU, but yeah, it sounds pretty janky. And then I've got this harmony part. And to be honest, when I heard that, like that beginning, just that slight crunch clean tone with the harmony guitars, I was like, ooh, that's pretty good. You know, if I do say so myself, I think that's pretty good. And then, as you know, in the song there's that distant voice, and I had a friend say that she thought that was really annoying, and so that's a nice thing to hear when you're doing a cover of a song that they think is annoying, and I'm like, oh gosh, how am I going to do this? But I interpreted it with a distant guitar, which I think sounds pretty cool. But I really only used it where it needed to be. I didn't want it to overstay its welcome. In the original song, when the chorus ends, they do it for 2 measures or something like that. You know, like they do it twice, and I just do it once and then go right back into it, which I felt like doing it twice was kind of dragging it out anyway, so I was trying to trim this down as best as I could, because even the original arrangement, the other thing with a lot of pop songs is the 3:30 mark is kind of that sweet spot. Maybe 4 minutes on the top end, 3 minutes on the low end, but 3:30 is kind of that sweet spot for most songs. But here's the thing. Whatever time limit you choose, your song has to be engaging. Just because your song is 3 minutes and 30 seconds long, it might feel longer if it's not engaging. I think of a band like Between the Buried and Me. They write 10-minute songs, and part of the reason that works is because you feel like you're going on a journey, like a story is unfolding as you listen to their music. So there's always something interesting happening. To be honest, I don't even know how they did it. As a young songwriter, I used to write like a lot of sections. I'd write an intro, a verse, I'd write a pre-chorus, a chorus, a post-chorus, and then I would repeat. And I'd write all of that, and my songs would end up being like 5 or 6 minutes long. But again, somehow in this song, they've ended up writing like so many sections, they still get into the chorus a minute into the song. Like, I don't know how they did that. Like, they write so many sections, but then it almost feels like the song was going to be too short and wasn't going to reach that point. And so it feels like they were trying to stretch it out, and I don't think the song benefited from that. Even in the Panic of the Disco version, they kind of compensate for that by doing the chorus at the very beginning of the song and then going into the verses. And even that's still a relatively short song. My version ended up coming out just being 2 minutes and 55 seconds, so under 3 minutes. But I feel like for this song, that's what's best for it. Like, don't drag it out, don't overstay your welcome. So I remember listening to the demo version of the song, and I always felt like it was kind of dragging. Like, it was almost there, but it just needed a little more oomph. So I did end up speeding up the tempo. The original tempo was 105 BPM, and I moved it up to 107. So yeah, that was pretty much my writing process for this song. Aside from that, here's my vocal template. I kind of forgot that this song is sort of designed to highlight the vocals, so I'm like, crap, I'm gonna have to really work on my vocals. I might make another video talking about this, but basically I practiced the vocals and then I would record them and sort of break it up and choose which parts I felt like sounded good and which parts needed work. And so I've got like this weak section down here, so that was the stuff that I would start practicing and kind of recording my voice, trying different things to see what worked best for that section. And basically I stitched together this kind of collection of all the good versions and then practiced singing it like that, so that when I went to sing it for real, I could hopefully pull that off. And I mean, it helped. The recording process for the vocals went by so much smoother than it usually does. And then I'll show you real quickly my mixing project. So yeah, this is pretty much the final product. I mean, before mastering, you know, this is the whole mixing product, but I've got the finished drums right here. And I'm pretty pleased with how those came out. Since the very first beat has toms in it, I kind of needed to up my tom game, because in the past the toms were just kind of there. They weren't really that great sounding. But I tried some new techniques that made these come out a lot better. I used some higher toms, so they were a bit tangier, and I used some processing techniques just to make them more exciting. So I was really pleased with how that came out. And then I really tried to push more of the drum room into the mix. I think before I've been a bit too subtle with it, and the drums come out sounding really dry, so I really wanted to put them in a space. I've got the sub here. Fun little fact, this sub comes from the Nail the Mix session with Nolly Gitgood. He says he uses them in almost every project, so I kind of do the same thing. And I just use them at key moments, so like when the song first kicks in, and every time we go into the chorus, going into the guitar solo, and then the very last hit of the song. We've got the guitars, they sound a lot better than the writing version. So they're a lot tighter, and you can hear that high end a lot better. So they work well. And they create a nice contrast, because if you think about it, the verses are very contained. We're playing just single notes, and we're palm muting a lot of that. And even speed picking, we're just palm muting single notes. So that, compared to these really big full chords in the chorus, like creates this big dynamic. It helps make the chorus sound a lot bigger. The guitar solo sounds a lot tighter. The tone is almost a little overhyped, but I kind of like it. I think it's appropriate for that section. I am thinking of experimenting with some other amp sims for my lead guitar, but that one's good enough to get the job done for now. Believe it or not, all these yellow tracks are the vocal track, and they're all just one part. These aren't backup vocals or anything like that. I thought about doing like harmonies and maybe some background screams or something to kind of help support and make the vocals more exciting. But again, I just felt like I need to make this as simple on myself as I could. And even the other versions really just had the one vocal. They didn't have too many other parts, unless you count the echo voice thingy. So I just did the one recording just of my voice, and then I did a few things to just help it stick out. So I've got the main track here, which is just the dry track, but I am sending it to a room, so it's got like a little bit of reverb on it. But I won't. Some look for trouble, while others don't. And then from there, I've got these two tracks. This one's called Vocal Air. This is actually the exact same track, but if you look at the EQ, I'm cutting out pretty much everything except the very top end, so it's kind of got some sizzle. And I don't even know if you can hear this, but I'll try to crank it up. It's turned way down in the mix, but you blend it in with the original vocal, and it just kind of opens it up. So listen to like without it and with it. Into the unknown, into the unknown. You hear how it just kind of opens up the voice, like when you add it in there. Without it, the voice is just kind of a little muted sounding. And then the other thing I have is some parallel compression. What compression is, for those of you who don't know, the voice is very dynamic. There are parts where it sings really loud, and then it gets really quiet. And the problem with a mix like this with all these instruments, when it's quiet, it might kind of duck behind everything and be hard to hear, and then all of a sudden it just kind of jumps out and gets loud. So you want the voice to sit in place. So that's what compression does. Compression kind of turns down those peaks so that the voice is less dynamic and it kind of stays at a relative motion. But the more you compress it, the less natural it sounds. So what you can do is you only do a little bit of compression on your main vocal so that it still sounds pretty natural, but then you create another version that is heavily compressed. Into the unknown. So you can hear that's like heavily compressed, and if you look at the meter, it's just like pinned at that certain spot. It's not like jumping up and down or anything like that. So what you do is you blend that in, and it kind of makes a nice foundation for the main vocal so that it just gives it kind of a solid anchor for its place in the mix. Into the unknown. So that's helpful, and then the only other thing I do is, I used to have a problem with delay because it would sound good at some places, and then some words it would sound really muddy. So what I learned is it's actually best just to create a track just for delay, and you just kind of cut out the parts where you want the delay. So you'll notice it's just on that last syllable. So I'm cutting out everything else, and just on the last syllable I have the delay. Into the unknown. Into the and without the delay. Follow you into the unknown. Into the it's just kind of dry. It doesn't have that, you know, epicness to it. But yeah, that's what went into the making of the song. So hopefully you found that interesting. This was a pretty fun little project to work on. I certainly learned a lot from this, and hopefully you learned some stuff that you can take and apply to your own projects. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.